Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm Nikki Bedi. I am hosting this wonderful panel of talent this afternoon. And as you can see by the name we've given this session, goodness gracious me, Asian representation from Grannies to Jihadis, ? Because there is a question or two to be asked about Asians on television. Was the comedy sketch show, goodness gracious me, instead of marking a beginning, actually the high point of British Asian representation on TV? And have things gone downhill since? Today, I think for a number of people, they look at Asian characters on screen and see paedophiles and terrorists. So can the portrayal of British Asians and our stories escape that fallout from 9/11 and Rotherham and be represented in all its diversity? And with all these ever more specialised platforms, can mainstream broadcasters compete and win over a growing, young, diverse and increasingly disengaged demographic? So those are some of the questions that we're going to address. And I'm going to introduce you to the talents who have opinions and can talk about all that. On my left, Anita Rani. So she describes herself as presenter, nomad and dancer with a question mark. I think we all know the answer to the last bit. And media whore, she just whispered to me. Her list of credits is very long and diverse. So presenting coverage for the royal wedding, Country File, you see her on The One Show. She travels the globe for the series World's Busiest Cities, and her two-part series, My Family, Partition and Me, just won her an RTS award. And, of course, there was Strictly. Mobeen Azhar, who is... Do you call yourself Azhar and Mobeen, or do you say it in an anglicised way?
Azhar and Azhar, depends, yeah.
Which would you prefer?
Azhar would be lovely.
Thanks, good, OK. Mobeen Azhar, journalist, filmmaker, broadcaster, Prince superfan. And he was the series producer on Muslims Like Us, which many of you will know won BAFTAs. So he's made uncompromising TV and radio, Generation Jihad, Inside Gay Pakistan, just to name a few, but you get the idea. On the end there, Sathnam Sanghera, journalist and author. Now, he's written 2 books, The Boy with the Top Knot, which was last year adapted and shown on BBC Two. We'll talk about that later, and Marriage Material. And he writes for, amongst other publications, The Times. And last, but by no means least, Queen Mehreen. That's her name on social media. Mehreen Baig, who is a teacher turned blogger turned TV presenter. And she came to the nation's attention on Muslims Like Us. And you see her regularly now on The One Show. And she's just made a programme about Asian men. Anita, I'm going to talk to you first. In fact, let me move that like that, and then I can actually see your face. Because otherwise it's like that, isn't it? One of the most recognisable faces on TV, and certainly one of the most recognisable Asian faces on TV. I think people would be interested to know how you started and what the challenges were.
Oh, God. Well, I'm getting old, so I've been around
You can
for
talk
a bit.
to the audience.
Yeah, I think most people in the room know, but I started working at my local radio station when I was 14, and then went off and studied broadcasting at uni, got a placement, worked as a runner on Top of the Pops, and remember The Ozone, that brilliant music programme? I was their office assistant whilst I was still a student for 6 months. It's like the best job in the world. I was getting records sent to me, and anyway, just absolutely loved working in television and radio, and was runner to researcher, and thought, great, I'm going to become a documentaries director. And then someone said, you're always giving it that. Why don't we put you on screen? And that happened really early on, in like a year into me being a researcher. And I've never looked back.
And when you were put on screen the first time, was it because you were a brown face and representing Asians?
Absolutely not. I was working for an indie, making a music programme for UK Play called Get Your Hits Out. Good. It's all about the title. And we were actually screen testing for a roving reporter. And the job was to do vox pops for an entire Monday, every Monday morning, playing the 3 latest singles to members of the public. Looking back, if you can do that, you can do anything. The vox pops are like... and it had nothing to do with... I was basically telling the girls coming in to do the screen tests what to say. And my director just went, we should just screen test you, and... Yeah, it just went from there.
Oh, but if we jump ahead,
yes.
Navigating your career, Country File.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the biggest brands for the BBC, and I think you famously said Asians don't go to the countryside.
Yeah. It's amazing. I still find myself going, wow, I'm actually having a conversation about neoprene-lined wellies. This is me now. This is amazing. But, I mean, I grew up...
Yeah, but at least that's fashion. What about pig's tits and things like that?
They're quite squidgy. Nikki. No, it's brilliant. It's brilliant that... and it's super important that I think I am part of that mix-up and that team. Not only because I'm obviously Asian, I think also being Northern, being a woman, and being from a city. I think all those things are what make it quite interesting that I'm on Country File.
And how do you think you have avoided, because I gave a list of just a few of your credits, there are so many more, being pigeonholed, because that would have been so easy.
So I don't know, okay, because there is no set trajectory in this career, and I guess we are a new wave, a new generation of people coming into an industry, or maybe I'm just a little bit older. We're sort of second generation Asians in this country, and we're probably the first kind of pioneers in our generation to do jobs that aren't the stereotypical jobs that our parents wanted us to do. So we're navigating all that. But on top of that, I was very aware. I worked at the Asian Network for a year, and I did a mid-morning debate show. I was there for a year. It was brilliant. I learnt my craft. I really enjoyed radio. But I went to see the boss of the network at the time, Bob Shannon, and I said, if you think I'm good at what I do, then give me a job on 5 Live. And, I mean, controversially, non-controversially, but that's how I felt. And he gave me a job on 5 Live.
And I think that's very interesting, because a lot of other presenters, and it's nothing to do with being Asian, would have just felt so safe having a 5-day-a-week job.
Yeah.
So there must be a personality trait that you also have. Do you need a spine of steel and something that makes you very resilient and determined?
I grew up in Bradford. I don't know. I think if you're the sort of person who wants to do something that is not expected of you, and you're prepared to kind of break a few rules from a very young age and not care, then I think that's just part of who I am. And yeah, there is no kind of no.
And in terms of doing something like The One Show and Country File and other big brand BBC programmes, how do you then strike a balance and do the projects that you really want to do? And I'm specifically talking about Partition, your series.
I think that is like the ultimate privilege, isn't it? When you can finally get to make the projects that you want to make. And the funny thing is, so the One Show story is, I'm going to tell you very quickly, that I got a phone call about 8 years ago, was it 9 years ago, from the One Show. My agent said, they want you to do a piece on the One Show. This would be great. You can get, it's a great, presenters want to work on the One Show. And they want you to do a story about forced marriages. And I went, here we go. Anita Rani, forced marriage correspondent. And because I'd had a lot of phone calls about doing a programme about forced marriages. But then I thought, hang on a minute. Rather than saying no, I know I can do that story really well. I innately understand something about the culture, what that's about, in a way that another presenter might not. So I have a duty to go and do that story, but do it in my way. So, and that actually, thank God I did, because I got a job off the back of it.
And now there must be some sort of separation for you between looking at somebody saying, we'll have Anita Rani because that's a brown face and she represents, and something like the British Asian season. The Big British Asian Summer is the name of the season. It's all across the BBC during the month of August. And firstly, why is there a need for a season like this? I mean, any of you can answer this. And do you want to go first, Anita?
I've said loads.
Mobeen.
Why is there a reason for a British Asian season? Because I think a lot of us are still at the point where we feel representation is in particular areas and it isn't always celebratory. So the British Asian season, I think, will set a celebratory tone. And that's a good thing.
I think there is, and it's wonderful to have a celebratory season, but I would love to get to the point where we don't need to have seasons to put programmes on the telly. I mean, that is the ultimate. But it is wonderful to be able to bag a load of programmes that kind of celebrate the culture.
And your particular programmes, plural, it's 2 parts, and it's got Bollywood in the title, ladies and gentlemen. But I think that's just an access point. And Bollywood is, well, we've heard so much about Bollywood, and I was going, oh, God, really, Bollywood? Well, I was very wrong. And you can tell us why.
Yeah, I mean, some people think they know Bollywood, and for a lot of Asians...
I was married to a Bollywood star, by the way.
She was. And I guess most people go, oh, Bollywood. And the funny thing is, I was not the kid... I mean, Bollywood is definitely part of my upbringing, but absolutely not in the same way that for a lot of British Asian kids who grow up in a culture where... I've got cousins whose children are 18 and only access their media through Asian channels. I mean, they're born and brought up in this country, and they know every Bollywood film, every Indian soap opera... And it's for me, that's a worry. But
that's interesting because it's giving us an insight into what people want then.
Yeah. I mean, and that wasn't me, but I do love... I've grown up with it, and the great Bollywood films, great. But I thought, I want to tell people about this industry, but at the same time, talk about where modern India is at, because I think it's kind of an access point to talking about this... in this amazing country, this fast-developing nation, and what it's about now.
Well, this is going to be shown on BBC Two, and we are going to look at a clip right now from Episode 2. And Episode 2 takes us beyond what traditionally we might think of as Bollywood and into something very different. Shall we just play the clip first, and then we can explain it?
Shall we sing it instead?
Yes, because I have vagina.
She basically starts singing because I have vagina. It's basically, the whole song is about the fact that she's treated appallingly in the film industry because she has a vagina. And it's shocking on many levels because, well, in India, to even talk about those things, but even to use the word vagina.
Yeah.
And All India Bakchod are basically the Indian version of Saturday Night Live. They're young comedians who are just... ripping up the rule. In fact, they're not even ripping up the rule book. They're just making their own rules up and kind of looking at India and Bollywood in a very irreverent.
And they exist online, so they don't get censored in the same way.
Well, they've tried to. I think they've had lots and lots of problems.
But that, just to put this in context, Kangana, who you saw, is a massive Bollywood star. So to get her doing this was fascinating. So... in terms of looking at heroines in India, she's taking the mickey out of heroines. What else did you discover about a young demographic in India and also young people going to India from here?
There's so many levels. It's just one of those kind of worlds that you enter into, and it tells you so much about modern India, so much about the modern world we live in. Now, India has changed, and I know most of you know this, but so dramatically in the last 25 years since they opened up their economy. And now you have a generation of kids who have only ever known Indian cities, metropolises, and they've grown up on a diet of Friends, hamburgers, and Hollywood movies. And so their references, their cultural point, everything is completely different to their parents. And they want to tell their stories. So you've got classic sort of Bollywood films happening, but you've also got this new generation of filmmakers who want to tell their stories, are writing their own scripts, and really shifting the film industry away from what it was. But at the same time, that they're having to deal with the old school India and the censorship board and old misogynistic directors who, and a deeply conservative society who really don't get what they're on about, which makes it so fascinating. And also you've got loads of British Asians going over there to get work as actors because they're not getting any work in the West for whatever reason, so that's another story. And also you've got white British kids going out there, particularly young female dancers, who have careers. Lots of Russian models.
Because in Bollywood films, traditionally, the white woman can only play 5 roles, and most of them are rape roles. So she is seen as as somebody who can be used. So what you show in this particular part of when you go onto the set is the white girls having to do all the twerking and the Walga movements. And the Indian dancers don't, do they?
Well, they do. Actually, I mean, I have to say that's one side of it. But at the same time, one of the characters who I can't wait for you all to see is called Amy Jackson. And she's from Liverpool. And she is absolutely white British Scouse, devastatingly beautiful, and has a legitimate career in the Indian film industry. She's a huge South Indian star, and now she's starting to make Bollywood films. She doesn't speak a word of Hindi or Tamil. She just mimes everything. So there is that issue as well, where lighter-skinned girls get all the roles. Yeah. So on the one hand, you've got that, and on the other hand, you've got, I
mean, there's masses in these 2 episodes. We can only just skim the surface now. But just before I finish off with you, just in terms of a specific interview with you, Anita, we'll keep talking, though. How do we tell real stories of British Asians today on television? How can we go about it?
I mean, I think, the panel shows that there are lots of real stories being told, and it's because, Sathnam is a perfect example. It is Sathnam's story. It's a totally real story because he wrote it. It's his life. The more people we have from different worlds and different backgrounds working in our industry, and the more stories we can get out, and real stories, authentic stories, that we want to tell. I can't believe that I've kind of worked my way, kind of making sure it's like, I don't want to be pigeonholed, I don't want to just... And I'm the one who goes, right, now I want to tell people about Bollywood. This... Because I wanted to, and I want to tell it in a way that I want to tell it, and it kind of represents what India is about and what British Asians are about. I think we need to be owning the stories.
And very briefly, to come back to our main question today, the state of Asian representation on TV, have things gone backwards?
No, because I'm an eternal optimist for starters. But what you said in your intro, that post Rotherham, are we just now jihadis? And actually, I remember growing up where it's like when you saw brown face on the telly, it'd be like, quick, come on, there's someone on the telly who's Asian, and it would always be the wife beater on the bill. or the beaten wife. So we've always been... Actually, I think we're kind of getting there. Progress is being made. It's being made slowly. There's still debates going on about Apu on The Simpsons. I cannot bear the kind of, the Asian kid in The Big Bang Theory who has an Indian accent. Why can't he just speak with an American accent? I'm still, I love it when we see Asian people in dramas who are incidentally there. They're not there because they're Asian. They're just there because they're a mate, because that's the world we live in. So I think it is happening, and I think... because we are having this panel and we've got this season and we've got brilliant people who want to make a difference in the industry, I think hopefully progress will be made at a more rapid pace.
And I'm going to ask you all the same question in due course. Mobeen, from a filmmaker's perspective, and you are part of a very small handful of Asian filmmakers.
I think 4 of us are in the room.
There you go. There you go. So what sort of films do you make, and what sort of films do you want to make?
So I have made lots of stuff about jihadis and terrorism and Muslims, but I've also made films about chemsex and addiction and Prince and lots of other stuff like that. So I'd say really the uniting thing is I'm interested in people and stories. So if it's got great people and great characters and great stories, then generally I'm interested. I would say I don't think there's a trade-off in terms of the films that I've made and the films that I really want to make. I think there's a continuum. So
just to understand, though, say, for example, the first things you made, were you playing to your strengths, perhaps, as somebody with Asian heritage in order to get seen? I
would, and I don't really disagree with what you said, but I do think quite often we see it as kind of we either have to tell stories where the Asian involvement is entirely incidental, or the reverse of that is it's about Rotherham or about... And I don't see it that way. I think you can do both things at the same time, and that's why I think the industry is going in that direction. So it's great that we have incidental Asian characters in EastEnders and that kind of stuff. But I would never shy away from doing a film about jihadis or Rotherham. I wouldn't shy away from that purely because primarily I'm a journalist. And so as a journalist, I'm interested in stories. So those stories are going to get told. Would I prefer that someone like me, who is informed or has an understanding, a cultural understanding, can take ownership? Yes, absolutely. So I'd rather we tell those stories. That doesn't mean I would never put up, orange tape and say, no, this is an Asian-only area, the white people need to go away. Of course not. I don't think it's about that, but I think it's about, Asian filmmakers and people with specialist knowledge being able to take ownership, and I think that's a good thing.
So do you encourage as many Asian people behind the scenes to be part of your productions? Is that something you deliberately do?
Absolutely, yes. So if you look at something like Muslims Like Us, I think it's a really good example, because I passionately believe one of the only reasons it was such a success was because at every level of the process, from the commissioners all the way down to the researchers and even a lot of the runners, they were people from a Muslim background, and they were handpicked. So it didn't happen by accident. We consciously said, there's this many people from a British Asian background, but we need like a Moroccan Muslim, so let's get a Moroccan Muslim runner. Do you know how hard it is to find a Moroccan Muslim runner, really? So we looked for those people, and it was in the DNA of the production, and I think that's one of the reasons it did really, really well.
Will you explain then the production process for Muslims like us? Why did you want to make it? I don't know. We'll show you a little clip in a moment for those of you who didn't see it. But perhaps you would just like give a paragraph for the setup for the whole series.
So Muslims Like Us allowed us to look at some of the big contemporary issues to do with the Muslim community in Britain. So absolutely, we didn't shy away from things like Jihadis and women's rights and Sharia and all that kind of stuff. But what it also did is take like a pop format and allow people to be humanized. And what we wanted to do was take a look at the internal conversations in the community. So the kind of conversations that you wouldn't see on Newsnight or you wouldn't see on a news program. I wouldn't involve people politely saying, I've got this view and I've got this view. But the kind of conversations that happen behind closed doors in family homes, for example, that was the idea. So
10 different people in the house from different Muslim backgrounds. In this clip, we're going to get a taste of Abdul Haq's adherence to what you might call a quite conservative interpretation of Islam. He's an ex-boxer, and he converted, or reverted, as you would say in Islam.
Sorry to depress everyone.
Powerful. It's full on, isn't it? Yeah. What was important to get right?
The casting was absolutely crucial. So I remember having these meetings early on that went through the whole pre-production process where all the Muslim researchers and APs, we'd sit down and we'd say, in our communities and in the ether, what kind of Muslims do we know? So we'd come up with kind of little titles for them. So we'd say, okay, everyone knows.
What's Mehreen's title?
Oh, my God. Do you know what? Honestly, so I don't think we've ever had this conversation. So there were two. So we said everyone knows a fashionable hijabi. So she was called the Fashion RB. So we had a board with Fashion RB written. And then we all said, we all know those, like, super fashion girls. So you started as the super fashion girl.
I was a super fashion girl.
Yeah, that was you. Yeah.
I'll take that.
But then there was more. So we had these categories, but it was all to do with, who do we know? So every member of the team would say, okay, I know a convert, or you get particular traits in like people that converted at a particular time in their life. So let's aspire to get these people or those people. And, we needed to get Shias. We needed to get a mix of people. So we had a big kind of checklist that we then worked our way through. I'd say that was the most crucial thing, getting the casting right.
And therefore that is telling a number of people's stories, coming back to the whole thing. Yeah.
Completely. And also then trying to work out where the fault lines are. So what is going to happen when fashion girl, whoever that might be, comes face to face with the puritanical convert? What is going to happen?
Oh, you were so good to him.
I know.
You were such a good soul. Anyway, so do you think that Asian portrayals are being hijacked by new-driven agendas around Muslims?
No. So I would really... the word hijack is unfortunate to start off with. So I'll
rephrase it.
No, it's not you. So what I'm saying is I have this conversation with lots of colleagues and lots of people in the Asian community all the time. I would advise against this kind of race to the bottom. So what I mean by that is within Asian circles and certainly within Muslim circles, we are so used to reacting to everything. And there's reasons for that. It goes back to Rushdie and 7/7 and 9/11 and so forth. So that means if there's going to be a program on Wednesday that is to do with Asians or Muslims, I will start getting WhatsApp messages 3 days earlier saying this program's going to be on, make sure you watch it. This is the number to call to complain.
Wow.
Yeah, we are so used to reacting. And that means that's completely relevant because when it comes to programs to do with Muslims, of course, those stories are going to be made because it's in the ether and it's out there at the moment. But what I really don't want to see, and I see this conversation happening all the time, is that then the other British Asian communities, like the Sikh community and the Hindu community, also develop that mentality that we are not being represented, we need to complain, we need to lobby more. And I think that has kind of started, well, it has. And I think that's actually worrying. So I don't think, and just to answer that more fully, I don't think any British Muslim filmmakers or the community at large rubs its hands together every time there's a new headline and thinks, oh, brilliant, we're going to have more programming made about our community. It's not about that. We just have to acknowledge that these things are in the ether. They're part of the news. People are interested. So there's a responsibility to reflect that. That doesn't mean it takes away from any other community. So I don't think the programming has been hijacked by the Muslim community.
And crudely then, why are young Asian people not watching TV? Or not watching our TV, BBC terrestrial channels?
So I would go further and say it's not just young people. I have this... let me paint a picture for you. Every time I visit Huddersfield, my hometown, and go see my parents, I have to wrestle the remote control out of the hands of my parents because they are watching things like ARY or Geo, which are channels via Sky that are beamed in from Pakistan. I have a massive issue with that, whether it's younger people who are raised with that now or whether it's older people like my parents in their retirement.
What's your issue?
The reason I have an issue with it is because, you know, I'm 38. Yeah, so when I was growing up, we grew up on a diet of EastEnders. My dad was obsessed with Newsnight. It was all that kind of stuff, which informed our view of Britain. So regardless of the fact that I went to a predominantly Pakistani school, had pretty much exclusively Pakistani friends, I had a view of contemporary Britain. My issue is that people like my parents, it's fair enough for them, they're retired, but if you're raised in a house where the only stuff you're watching is from abroad, and I'm talking about a lot of these channels, you know, they'll tell you the time in Pakistan, they'll tell you the weather in Pakistan, so it's got no kind of correlation.
So are you, just clarify this. When you were growing up, your father was watching Newsnight, and that informed you, but now, as he's got older... He's wanting to hold on to his roots.
It's not just that. It's not just that. It's not a willful thing that he just wants to hold on to his roots. He bought a skybox. That's what happened to the country. Everyone bought a skybox.
Wow.
And so because you buy a skybox, you've got all these options.
I don't think it's just about Asian kids not watching, plugging in. I think it's a youth demographic we're talking about. It's not just why are because Asian kids do tap in and out. It depends whether there's something on that they want to watch, you know. And I guess what are those things? That I think they quite like international documentaries, don't they? They quite like seeing young people on.
Completely.
They quite like seeing people that look like them on screen.
Are you the youngest person on the panel, Mehreen? Do you
Yes.
watch TV? Do people of your... That makes me sound like Granny Get Your Groove On. But
I'm not that young,
right.
But I have been a teacher for many years, and I have worked with young people for many years, and I've worked with young people of diverse backgrounds for many years. And I would argue, and I apologise in advance, a disclaimer, like I don't know about the TV world, so I may say something that I'm not supposed to say, but going to go with it.
Go with it anyway. No rules.
I feel like when I was growing up, I didn't see, the only Asian women I would see on TV were either overweight Auntie Gs who are wearing saris with trainers, out of breath, running in a park, speaking in heavy accents for comedic purposes, or if you ever saw a liberated Muslim woman, she would be someone who had possibly shunned her faith or her culture and felt emancipated as a result of that. And what was missing was a middle voice and a middle narrative. And that doesn't mean the middle voice, there's just one type. There's a spectrum, but there was... For years, we've been adhering to these kind of binary oppositions, and that middle representation was missing. And I think equally, when I look at people younger than me and I look at teenagers, and it isn't just Asian young people, you're right, but they're not seeing themselves being reflected. They're not seeing their stories, because on a day-to-day basis, the battles and the issues that they face are not FGM or honour killings. And yes, it's important to talk about that, but actually you kind of hear about it and you go, oh, another one. And I think that's the reason why Islam, Women and Me, my BBC One documentary, I think that's why it had 46% higher audience of 16 to 24-year-olds, because I was talking about still living at home with my parents and having a really overprotective father, and about having curfews and changing my clothes when I leave the house. And that's actually a day-to-day struggle. And as much as it may sound, futile, it might sound frivolous, their stories aren't, their real stories and issues aren't being represented. Things that are interesting to them aren't being represented. And I don't know if this is going to come out wrong, but young people and young ethnic people, who can they really sort of turn on the TV and say, do you know what? I relate to her, or I want to grow up and possibly be like her, and it's achievable, because maybe she's not super academic, or maybe she wasn't private schooled, or maybe she's not white, or maybe, for various reasons, I could be like her.
So is that one of the reasons that you decided to take part in Muslims Like Us? What was the reason?
The reason was partly because Mobeen wouldn't let me get on with life until I said yes. No, okay, so it all started...
A persuasive series producer.
Oh, you don't even know the half of it. I was teaching at the time, and I had no intention, no desire to ever be on television. But I was writing blogs. So I did start writing articles about things and issues that were important to me. And they weren't solely Muslim issues or solely Asian issues, but that was involved. Obviously, Mobeen and Farrakhan got in touch, and they approached me with the idea of Muslims Like Us, and I was apprehensive, and I declined for a long time.
3 times.
What made you apprehensive as a matter of interest?
Because I was sceptical of the media. I was sick and tired of representation, the way that Asians and Muslims and Muslim women in particular had been represented anyway. And I assumed that if they want to get someone like me, which is a rare depiction, on telly, I will become the poster girl for everything that's wrong with Islam. And I'm going to be in a house, possibly with 9 people who are going to jump at me and tell me, how can you be a Muslim? You've got your nails done. And I wasn't going to be a guinea pig. I don't know how it's going to be edited. I have, everyone grows up, and if you're slightly media savvy, you know not to trust these people. So I went with that.
These people.
Yes. No, I did. And it was a really long process, lots of conversations, and Mobeen did pester me for a long time. And it came down to a conversation where Mobeen actually said, look, Mehreen, if you don't do it, I'm going to get Mehreen number 2 to do it. And she's going to not say what you wanted to say, and she's not going to say it in the way that you want to say it, and it will really frustrate you. And then I guess, again, conversations with my father about what my concerns were, and meeting the rest of the team, speaking to people like Farah, speaking to, obviously, Mobeen over a length of time, and then getting to know, Fatima Salaria, this godsend of a woman, was part of it. And the fact that the team was deeply rooted within the Muslim community, we had the same concern, they understood my concerns. Yep. That gave me more confidence, and ultimately it was worth the risk. I felt a sense of responsibility that it was worth the risk to be part of a project which will explore an identity that had been vilified and generalised.
So you've already touched on the fact that you are not what a lot of people imagine a stereotypical Muslim girl or woman to be. It was important, I think, for people to see so many different representations of the religion, the community, the culture. What sort of reactions did you get? Because you did get backlash, didn't you?
Yes. Muslims Like Us, I think, because there were 10 of us, I didn't receive much criticism and much backlash, I'll be honest. There was sort of very little. The overwhelming sort of response to me was positive, and I think that was a mixture of a non-Muslim... I'm born and brought up in London. I have got this I'm in this bubble of we're very multicultural, etc. But actually, there are some people who have never seen a Muslim woman speak before. So from the non-Muslim community, there was a lot of, oh, wow, look, you're normal. We don't know that. And there was a lot of, within the community, there was a lot of, do you know what? Thank God, I can relate to you. But Islam, Women and Me was solely me. I was the face of that. And I did receive a lot of backlash from within the Muslim and Asian community.
And was it men reacting to you, women, or could you not tell?
It was both. I was insulted about everything from the colour of my skin being too dark to my character.
I'm darker than you.
And it was difficult. It was. I can't pretend that it wasn't. Because I think the level, the threshold of accountability and the level of analysis you face when you're a brown person in a public space is higher. And people are, I think, more... a lot of, you don't represent me, you don't represent my views. And of course I don't. I can only talk about my own experiences. But I think, I don't know, it's a bit of a burden. It's a huge responsibility to think a white presenter doesn't have to represent their entire community. They speak for themselves and no one says, how dare you say that? It's a different opinion to mine, or how dare you say that while your shoulder's showing? Whereas, there is this kind of burden of, I don't want to be a sellout to my own community, but I do want to explore issues and be honest and fair and balanced. Can I carry on?
Yes.
I'm so sorry.
No, you can.
And I'll be honest, there have been moments where I felt like people are looking for kind of an Asian face who will speak out against the community. And I was never going to be that girl because I love my culture and I love my heritage, but I will always be fair and balanced. And while I was shooting my new documentary about British Asian men, I went to Bradford, and it was the first time I've ever been to Bradford. And it's a predominantly Asian area. And I was doing a piece to camera basically talking about how misrepresentation kind of affects real people and how unfair that is. And I was really kind of standing up for certain issues. And while I was doing it, I was approached by a group of people who recognized me from my previous documentaries, and we were basically attacked. And I was so disillusioned for like a good week or so. I thought, why am I going to be poster girl and stand up for these people who I don't fit their prototype of what a good Muslim woman looks like. So why am I even putting myself through this? And ultimately how I dealt with that is you've got to remember that I know I've turned down projects I don't believe in. I know that everything I've ever said in any of my shows, whether that be Muslims Like Us, Islam, Women and Me, on the One Show, on anywhere, I've always been completely honest, and I've done it with integrity. And once you kind of realize and recognize that, you can say, do you know what? You can throw your insults. I know that I haven't lied. I've said what's entirely true to my experience, and if you don't like that, there's nothing I can do.
You were protected on that set and where you were, weren't you?
Was.
Yes, good.
The
Just to
BBC
clarify,
looked
the
after me.
BBC and BBC Two really looked after her. You were making this film about Asian men.
Yes.
I'm going to show you a clip of this now. And in this scene, you are examining Asian boys and their toys. Why did you want to make that, Mehreen?
Why did I want to make that?
And what have you learned?
I wanted to make it because I was sick and tired of the way Asian men are portrayed on television. I've got a father and a brother and a nephew who will grow up with all of these negative perceptions attached to them. And again, I was nervous about becoming involved in this project. I'd already done sort of Muslims Like Us, Islam, Women and Me, and I thought, I don't want to be pigeonholed as the brown girl who can only talk about Muslim and brown issues. But equally, I knew that if I don't do it, someone else will. And I can, even if they're tricky and uncomfortable questions to ask, I can ask them with authority because I'm part of that community. It's my community. So there was, I guess, a sense of responsibility that if anyone's going to do it, if the show's going to be made, like what Mobeen was saying, then I'm going to be the one to do it. And also, I know there are problems within the Asian community, as there are with any, but there are reasons for that, and it's so much more nuanced and complex than we're often shown. And I knew that I mean, I had a fabulous team who helped me be part of all the development. So I knew I could explore that in the way that I wanted to explore that I felt was fair and balanced.
So you can see the film. It hasn't actually got a specific title yet, has it?
Not yet.
Will it be a wicked title? It's going to be part of the Big British Asian Summer, which is a season all across the BBC this summer. Yours will be specifically on BBC Two.
Yes.
The Boy with the Top Knot, as I mentioned earlier, was adapted for BBC Two from Sathnam Sanghera's incredibly moving book. It was a very personal film, just as it was a very personal book. In fact, Sathnam, with your permission, before we talk further, let's watch a scene from the film. And what you're going to see is the legendary Bollywood and Hindi film actor Anupam Kher, who plays your father, and Sasha Dhawan is you. Will you just tee this up for us briefly and tell us what's going on in this scene?
Yes, basically, I was a journalist for about a decade, doing very un-Asian things, working for the FT, test driving cars, interviewing people and politicians. And somehow I'd never asked very basic questions of my family, because talking to our families is quite a difficult thing. So this is the scene where, after almost 6 months of research, I finally start talking to my dad. I think it's that scene anyway.
The reason that is so incredibly poignant, perhaps you can tell us about your father and what we were seeing there.
Yeah, it turns out my dad had schizophrenia, and my sister too, and I somehow didn't realise that until I was about 29. Actually, I had a very surreal experience with Anupam, a very famous actor. He was nominated for a BAFTA a few weeks ago, so he came to London. And on the day, he texted me and said, "Hey, will you help me buy some shoes?" I was like, "Okay, I'll go and help you buy some shoes." So I went to his hotel. And I was taking him for a walk across St. James's Park to Oxford Street, and he was totally mobbed by like hundreds. I mean, I didn't realise how famous he was, because I didn't watch that many Bollywood movies. He's so famous. And it struck me, the weirdness. It's so weird having your family story on TV, and that actually happened almost exactly like that. The weirdness is that my father, if you have schizophrenia, people cross the road to avoid you. So it struck me whilst he was being mobbed. I was like, it's so odd having an actor where people are drawn to you, and you're playing someone who's the exact opposite. And I think that's the reason it was so powerful.
It's quite exposing, obviously, to write about your family. You've just touched on the fact that then you're seeing it played out on screen. Were you happy with the way that the film turned out?
Yeah, I mean, it's an amazing thing to have your life story on TV, you know.
How involved were you?
I didn't want to be involved at all because it was so painful. And actually, I can't even watch it now. Even that, I had to look at my phone because it's so raw even now. And but it's an amazing thing to happen, mainly because, not just because it's important in a British Asian way, because it's a normal family being portrayed in a normal way. It's just also because of the mental illness thing, which is almost never on TV. And, you know, I had so many amazing messages from people saying, you know, my brother hasn't talked to me in 10 years and he texted me and now we're talking again because he watched your drama. And things like that. I'm quite a cynical person. I can't be cynical about that.
How much of the background team were Asian? How many were Asian? And was that important to you in terms of getting a representation who understood an Asian story? Or is it irrelevant? Are you just making good drama?
Well, this relates to what everyone else has been saying here, right? So we actually had a white, working-class Scottish director. And the screenplay was written by Mick Ford, white guy. I was involved in helping him, you know, change it a bit and so on. But the producer was Nisha Party, who was Indian. And we got some grief from people saying, why didn't you pick an Asian director? And for me, it was really important that it was a multicultural project, because that's what it was like for me growing up in Wolverhampton. If I think of the Midlands of the 80s, I think of like UB40, you know, a black guy, two white guys playing reggae music. For me, it's always a mix, and for me, it had to be mixed. So I think it's important not to be kind of to put ourselves into a ghetto. And what makes me so proud of even listening to all these stories is that we all do our Asian things. And you too, Nikki, we all do our Asian things, but you present Loose Ends, which is a general program. And I think it's really powerful for that reason. And, it really moves me that Anita does all this mainstream stuff with Strictly Countryfile, but then makes this really powerful documentary about partition. I think if you do that mix of stuff, it's more powerful than if you just do one thing.
Yeah. So, is there any point, in your opinion, of having programs that are just for Asians?
I think there's...
Or even having an Asian, radio station?
Well, I've actually argued against the idea of having an Asian radio station, I know. I think we've got to get to the point that America has got to, where you've got Master of None, you've got Lily Singh. I was walking through New York the other month, and there's a giant billboard of Lily Singh.
Yeah, Mindy Kaling.
Yes. And you're like, these are... In Britain, people would look at these stars and say, you're Asian. Yeah. In America, they don't seem to do that. They're just like... They recognise the talent.
Go on.
I completely agree with you. I'm always very conflicted about it because I'm always been really aware of not wanting to be put in a ghetto. Like, if you rate me, then put me out there and put me in the mainstream. But I have to say, my first presenting job on the BBC was with the Asian Programmes Unit. They started this ahead of its time cult TV show called Desi
DNA,
right? Oh, you all watched it?
Yeah.
We've all been part of it. And they got 3 unknown presenters. I got a phone call. I was doing something on Channel 5, and it was me, Adil Ray, and Nihal, who all were picked as the 3 presenters of the show. And so it's interesting, you're right, that we need to kind of get to a point where we're not in a... But at the same time, if it wasn't for kind of Asian people in the media, I don't think half of us would have got the breaks that we did.
And also I think there's a need for something like this now.
Yeah.
Because...
For this season.
Just because what's going on now with Asians is so extreme, I write
So what's
for the
this
Times.
season doing then?
It's counteracting the trolling and the negativity. I write about business for the Times. I write about something to do with Facebook. I'll get a load of comments saying, oh, what about the Asians in Rotherham? What about the rape gangs? What are you doing about that? And it's like, what the hell? I think so. Sometimes you need something like this to counteract it.
Okay, so if we do need something like this, fantastic, being delivered. Going back to what you were saying, comparing America to the UK, what are we missing then? What do we need to do to jump to that point?
So I think one thing that we're perhaps slightly overlooking in this conversation is there is a intersectional part of this discussion. And so what I really mean by that is a few years ago, so I'm not going to diss anyone here, but a few years ago, I worked with Michelle Hussein, who's incredibly talented, brilliant, and she's really, really good. And I remember 10 years ago, she was held up as kind of, this is diversity, and Michelle Hussein has done brilliant stuff. I know from working with her, she'd be the first person to say, actually, I went to private school, I grew up in Dubai, I've got nothing in common with average British Asians. And I think that's really significant because in terms of on-screen or in production, I think quite often what we have is a kind of cookie cutter approach, which means we will take people from different backgrounds, but almost through this kind of weird process of osmosis, we will get them to kind of make their edges less sharp, speak in a particular way, use a particular kind of language, and we turn them into TV people, which is a problem. Mehreen mentioned a couple of times this phantom figure of someone called Farah. So Farah was a casting producer on Muslims Like Us. The reason I go back to Farah is if anyone's ever met Farah, she is one of the most un-TV people that I know. She does not look or walk or talk or behave like a TV industry person.
How does a TV person walk and talk and behave?
You know what
You are not getting away with that.
No, there's like a particular vernacular. There's just like, where, we congratulate each other and stuff. We're like a particular ilk of people. But what I mean is, there's a class element to this. There's a class element to this. So what I'm saying is, I do not think we are at the stage yet where we can say we don't need an Asian station, or we don't need this, or we don't need this kind of season. I would love that to happen, and I think it will happen, because I think lots of good progress is being made And I think the BBC is doing amazing, amazing work. But I don't think we're there yet.
Sathnam, I know that you've spoken about Asian people on TV being quite fun, and then after 9/11, it all changed.
Oh, this is my theory.
So I want to hear this.
Is that Britain was way ahead of almost every other Western country in terms of the way we could produce multicultural art. So we had Goodness Gracious Me, the Kamars on number 52, Bend It Like Beckham. But I think the united thing with all of them, if you think about it, they're all funny. And so my theory is that then 9/11 happened, which killed the joke. And then we were like, oh, well, how do we react to this? And almost we stopped making things
But isn't
for
it
10
mad
years.
that it was not... I completely agree. I think 9/11, the world changed. In Bradford, growing up in Bradford, my mum and dad ran a factory. Asia, like the Punjabi community, whether you're Pakistani, Indian, it was kind of... There was lots of overlap and people would dress them. I didn't see one hijab growing up in Bradford. Now you go to Bradford, it's a completely different world. I think the Muslim community became more politicised. Yeah. Lots of subtle things happened that have changed the world completely. But here's the thing, we keep using this amazing word Asian, and we're talking about 9/11, which encompasses the Middle East, as well as, you know, and here we are, Pakistani, Indian, Punjabi, like we're kind of this term that, and we all from such, and even Mehreen's experience of being a Pakistani Muslim woman is completely different to a Pakistani girl living off Lum Lane in Bradford from a Mirbury community. So it's this, like there's so many nuances, so many different things that this one word encompasses.
I think understanding is increasing. I think people now know the difference between Sikhs and Muslims.
Also,
I think, because of Muslims like us and programs like that, and also actually Nadia Hussain, I think is the best example of this.
Yeah, absolutely.
There are now people on TV who are just brilliant personalities first, and then they happen to...
Yeah. But do you think then, if you were Nadia's agent, would you now be telling her something, don't do anything that just talks to an Asian audience or highlights you as an Asian, do something wider? What would you do? What would you advise her to do?
Well, she does do wide stuff.
I'm asking you what you would advise, though.
Well, I interviewed her last week. She's in a position that all of us, I think, are in, where she's quite successful, but now just gets so much trolling. It actually changes the way you progress your career.
Do you not get trolled?
Not that much.
Okay, let's talk about that then.
We need to increase the amount of trolling you get.
No, not even in jest.
I only get trolled when I say anything about being Asian, but only from a certain section of white men, and it's only a couple, but actually my programs, when I did the partition program, I didn't get any trolling. Actually, I got a lot of, like your program, because your program told a universal story, Sathnam. It was a story about a family, it was a story about mental health, but it was your story, it was a British story, and it was universal. I think the partition is when people see the humanity and they connect with it, I don't think the trolling.
I bet you get trolled, Mehreen.
But you see,
yes, Mehreen's experience is.
Yeah.
But also, if you're voicing an opinion, as opposed to reflecting something that is historically true and nobody can debate that, you're open.
Also, I'm not a Muslim woman.
No.
I think Mehreen has to deal with misogyny. I don't know. I don't want to talk for you, but I'm sure that it's a completely different experience for you.
Completely. And I think partly it is what you just said about the fact that if you are maybe particularly a Muslim woman who is voicing an opinion, automatically you're opening up a whole gateway of trolling. But
we know.
Don't take the edges off. Say trolling.
But I've had people make remarks when I've done a segment on Sunday Morning Live, which is nothing linked to Islam or my culture, even vaguely, and people have commented and said, oh, look, has this become like, why are there 4 coloured presenters on this show? And people have had a problem with that. So I will get it all the time, not just when I'm voicing an opinion about Muslim or Asian issues.
I'm so aware that we are running out of time and we could carry on talking for a lot longer, I know. Do any of you have questions for the panel? Gentleman in the front row there, would you tell us your name as well?
Yeah, hi, I'm Sathnam Sanghera. I am a science teacher here in Sheffield, but I'm also a theatre director. I think you guessed why I'm science. But basically, what I was going to ask is that we talked a lot about clocks and hasn't sound stop fest. But I remember the first kind of TV series I watched related to on the BBC was actually Arabian Nights, 1001 Nights. And it was very kind of like depicting of like, oh my god, this is like some kind of another kind of fictional story about kind of beyond Aladdin. And I was kind of asking kind of in
Thank you.
Sorry. In a way of like how TV is changing with Netflix, and talked about how much Asian people watched TV at home, and how many young people actually watched a TV box set at all. If I want to watch something on BBC, I'd probably watch it on BBC iPlayer. Do you think that actually there needs to be more kind of fictional, universal stories or within the Asian community? I mean, we talked about Black Panther coming out last year. It didn't necessarily have to be a black person going to watch it to actually enjoy it. In fact, I think a lot of people in the Asian community enjoyed it on the basis that it was such a depiction, different stories come to the big screen. I mean, there's talk about Miss Marvel coming out in a few years' time, and I think that would be huge for the Asian community anywhere across the world. But yeah, I just want to get your views on like fictional stories.
Thank you, Mobeen.
Just
Go ahead.
very briefly, so I don't know if you know Netflix have a kind of recommended you have to watch type thing. So for the first time, they've got a Bollywood drama as one of their must watches, and that's not for a niche audience. Yeah. It's for this is what everyone should be watching, and it's a pretty traditional Bollywood drama. But I think the thing that's different. There's billions of people that watch it, but it's that thing about it's got brown people in it and it covers certain themes, but are those themes universally relatable? Yes, they are. So similarly, like when The Boy with the Top Knot, I wouldn't even, I don't think that's, of course it's an Asian program in a sense, but mental health affects everyone. So I think if we can punch through and get stuff that, just is interesting to watch, I think that's the model.
But also, we need to be writing those stories. I think we need to find the talent. We need to encourage the talent. We need to somehow. You're absolutely right. There is a huge. I don't just think it's an Asian thing. It's a class thing. But it's a responsibility to go and find and encourage and somehow open the pathways, the gateways. Whether that's having more production companies up in the north or whatever, or whether it's kind of having scholarships so that kids can afford to blooming come to London in the first place. Whatever it is, we need to kind of find the talent and find those young kids who have those stories to tell, and that's exciting.
Anybody else got a question? Gentleman at the back there, back row in the middle. Thank you for running up and down with the microphone. Walking fast, anyway. What's your name?
John.
Hi, John.
Hello, I work in Factual. I was going to say, I'd really like to know what the panel think, but I think the issue of representation is really much more acute in drama than Factual. I think in Factual we're fairly well represented. We could do better. But it's really in drama that we haven't got any representation. I've got black friends who complain, why is there only one Luther? The Asian population is double that of the black population in Britain. We haven't even had one Luther yet. And I think, as an example, if you watch certainly medical factual programs, 24 hours in A&E, ambulance, hospital, there's lots of, you'll have Asian representation. But if you put it on Holby City or Casualty, where are they?
I agree. I suspect it's about money. It's partly about money. Drama is so expensive to make, and the BBC can only do so much.
No, but why? In terms of where are the Asian actors and the people then? Is it because they're not the stars yet?
Yeah, I do think things are changing with Netflix. In that, the guy who played me, Sasha's doing a Netflix series at the moment. I mean, the thing I'm obsessed with most on Netflix is Fauda, which is an Israeli-Palestinian drama.
Brilliant, isn't it?
Subtitled. And I just think it's changing the way people watch TV.
But then there is Sacred Games, Vikram Chandra's thing, is going to be the equivalent of Fauda and all those other dramas.
I think you're right. We need to find more Asian people in talent, and this comes back to the Asian men. I can't name one leading Asian man on anything, like any Western thing that I've watched, where they're cool. We're always the nerds.
That's a very horrible thing to say about Sanjeev Bhaskar.
Apart from Sanjeev. But, it kind of, there's time.
God, that's a really, really interesting point. John, you've got another question?
I don't think it's about having the actors, because our actors, the best ones, Dev Patel, Parminder Nagra, they have to move to the States to get work. So it's really about the productions. Where are they? Where are these dramas in which Asians have the lead role, other than grooming or jihadi cases?
So roles need to be written for them, or you just need to not cast according to being Asian?
Yeah, or commission them.
Yeah, good points.
Yeah, my book.
Yes, so Riz Ahmed is...
there you go, he's in Star Wars, come on.
Yeah, exactly, but he's gone to America. But no, he is working on a 9-part series for the BBC called Englistan, and he's encouraging young writers and voices to come forward. So he's actually providing an incubatory space for these young fresh talents. Somebody else had a question. Anybody? Hands? Hello over there. You can have a biscuit after all this running around.
Hey, I'm Seb. I also work in theatre.
Hello.
Hello. You've kind of touched it, actually, a couple of times. Because I remember in The Good Immigrant, Riz Ahmed has a really good essay where he talks about having to go to America to find all the big roles, and now he's in a Star Wars, which is incredible. But when did that happen? It seems like mad how I don't remember a few years ago there being many big Asian stars in the States, and then it suddenly just happened. And do you know when you noticed that they suddenly overtook us with their representation?
I don't think it did just happen, actually, because I remember watching things like growing up and being very aware that Paminda Nagra, after Bend It Like Beckham, got a major part in ER when Archie Punjabi won an Emmy. And I remember distinctly going, so why are they not on the cover of every British magazine? These are British, this is British talent. And nobody cares. No, they're not on every chat show. They're not, and it broke my heart. So I think what's happened is that they've actually been there for a while, but somehow we have now started talking about it, because I think we've just become aware that we're losing a raft of talent to America. But actually, they've been going for a while. They've been out there working away and doing really well.
So do you think, Anita, then it is just a question of time and for us to keep seeing great talent on our screens here?
I think something is coming to a head. I hope so, anyway. I hope we're not back here in another 10 years and I'm on another Let's Talk About Brown People and telly panel. But no, maybe we will be, and that's fine. And hopefully I'll still be asked to be on it. But I think we've just come to a point where I think the world has changed. I think the way we consume telly has changed. I think we're very aware that we need to bring audiences in. We're very aware that kind of Asian kids, youth people, they're not watching telly. So I think everyone's looking at what we can do to make sure that and also we want to reflect this world, the Britain that we live in. It would be so tragic and misguided if television doesn't move forward with the rest of kind of the world the way people like YouTube or Netflix or whatever. So I think it's right. I think things are happening.
I'm going to ask all of you before we actually say goodbye to tell me what you would like to see more of on our screens. Sathnam, I'm coming to you first. Hey!
He doesn't watch telly.
I actually want longer dramas, like Netflix.
Okay.
I just think they have 12 parts. And I just think maybe that's part of the solution to get younger people watching things.
Mehreen, what about you?
I would love to see Asian people and Asian women and Muslim women doing things that aren't just about Asian and Muslim issues, doing everything. Yesterday there was a BBC One celebration of 100 years of someone getting the vote, and there were 2 brown women on there talking about women getting the vote, and it was such a beautiful thing to see. I think that's what needs to be done. They need to be normalised.
I think post Harry and Meghan and the amazing royal wedding that we all watched with, Reverend Michael Curry and that amazing gospel choir, I think if the royal family can do it, then, I think that's what it's happening. I think more representation, more stories, just all of it.
Last word to you, Mobeen.
I just want to see, we're doing it, but I want to see more of it. I want to see really complicated stories with the complicated, messy bits that don't fit an existing narrative left in. That's what I want to see.
Can I add one more? Just one.
Well, you've got exactly 15 seconds.
Okay, I want to see cool Asian people. I think exactly what Anita said.
Well, that's all of you here
We're
today.
never cool.
You are cool, all of you. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you so much. And you can see Anita and Mehreen's films on BBC Two and so much more as well as part of the Big British Asian Summer all across the BBC. Thank you all so much.